My own daughter-in-law thought she had it all figured out. She was literally packing my life into cardboard boxes, measuring my floors for luxury furniture, and planning her fabulous new life in the house I paid for. She thought I was just a clueless old woman losing her memory, but she made one fatal mistake. She never looked closely at the smoke detectors. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the nightmare started. I had come home early from my church prayer group because I was fighting a slight headache. The house was supposed to be empty. My son, Marcus, was out of town on another IT sales trip, and his wife, Chloe, was supposed to be at the gym. But when I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer, I froze. There, stacked neatly against my oak hallway walls, were 10 heavy-duty moving boxes. Before I could even process what I was looking at, I heard a voice echoing from my living room. I quietly slipped off my shoes and crept down the hall. Peeking around the doorframe, I saw Chloe. She was pacing across my rug with a metal tape measure in one hand and her phone pressed to her ear. She was laughing loudly. I heard her tell whoever was on the phone that an $8,000 green velvet sectional would fit perfectly right by the bay window. Then she said the words that made my blood run cold. She said it will look gorgeous just as soon as we get all of the old lady's junk cleared out of here next week. A wave of ice-cold shock washed over me instantly, replaced by a burning fury. This was my home. The home I worked 40 back-breaking years as a NICU nurse to pay off. Chloe stood there admiring the walls, utterly convinced she had already won. She honestly believed I was just a fragile, out-of-touch retiree who would quietly step aside. What she did not know was that, 2 months ago, I had a security team install hidden cameras in every common area of my house. I did not get this house by accident. When my beloved husband passed away 30 years ago, I was left with a shattered heart and a little boy who looked exactly like him. I made a promise right then and there over my husband's grave that our son Marcus would never lack for anything in this world. I spent 40 grueling years working as a neonatal intensive care nurse at the Maine County Hospital. You really do not know true bone-deep exhaustion until you have worked back-to-back double shifts, watching over fragile little babies fighting for their lives, and then come home to raise your own child completely alone. Every single extra shift I took, and every holiday I worked while other families celebrated around their warm dinner tables, went straight into paying off this beautiful 4-bedroom colonial home in a pristine Atlanta suburb. This house became my sanctuary. Every single brick, every glass window, and every polished oak floorboard was paid for with my sweat and my tears. I poured every ounce of my love and energy into Marcus. I made sure he had the absolute best education possible. When he graduated college, he walked across that stage with a bright smile, his degree in hand, and absolutely zero student loan debt. I desperately wanted him to start his adult life with a clean slate, not weighed down by the heavy financial burdens that trap so many young people today. I gladly sacrificed my own social life, my vacations, and my own comfort, so my son could soar. And soar he certainly did. He grew into a smart, hard-working man, landing a fantastic job in corporate sales that kept him traveling across the country. I was so incredibly proud of the man he had become. I truly thought my days of struggling and worrying were finally over forever. I thought I could finally relax and enjoy the sweet fruits of my labor in the peaceful home I had rightfully earned. But a mother's heart is always soft when it comes to her children. 3 years ago, Marcus married Chloe. She was beautiful and charming at first, but it did not take long for me to see that her demanding taste for luxury far outpaced their actual household income. She constantly wanted new designer bags, extravagant 5-star vacations, and expensive restaurant dinners every single weekend. When they started talking about buying their own house together, it became painfully obvious they were struggling to save for a decent down payment. Chloe simply spent money faster than Marcus could bring it in. Seeing my son stressed out and anxious broke my heart. So I did what any loving mother would naturally do. I made them a very generous offer. I told them they could move into the entire top floor of my house, completely rent-free, so they could save up a massive nest egg for their dream home. I sincerely thought I was giving them a wonderful blessing. Instead, I had unknowingly invited a selfish parasite into my peaceful sanctuary. From the moment Chloe moved her expensive matching luggage into my upstairs bedrooms, she treated my home like a free luxury hotel. The daily indignities started out small, but quickly became absolutely unbearable. I found myself doing all the grocery shopping and cooking just to make sure Marcus had a hot, home-cooked meal when he came home exhausted from his business trips. I was constantly cleaning up after Chloe's endless messes because she would leave her sticky coffee cups on my antique wooden tables and her expensive clothes thrown recklessly across the laundry room floor. I endured it all out of deep love for my son. I bit my tongue and swallowed my pride every time Chloe made rude, passive-aggressive comments about my home. She would sigh heavily and say my living room was so horribly dated, or complain that the solid oak cabinets in my kitchen were hopelessly out of style. She practically treated me like the hired help in my own house. I kept quiet, believing this was just a temporary situation. I had no idea she was secretly planning to make my temporary generosity her permanent luxury lifestyle. I waited until I heard Chloe's car pull out of the driveway before I stepped out of the shadows. My hands were shaking as I walked over to that stack of heavy cardboard boxes sitting in my hallway. I pulled open the top flaps of the nearest box, expecting to see old kitchen supplies or winter coats. Instead, I found my own personal photo albums carelessly tossed underneath a pile of dirty, moth-eaten sweaters. My heart pounded against my ribs as I dug deeper. Right at the bottom of the second box, my fingers brushed against a thick manila folder. I pulled it out and opened it right there on the hardwood floor. Inside was a glossy color brochure for a place called Shady Pines Manor. It was a grim, low-income state-run assisted living facility located completely out of the way 3 towns over. The pictures showed stained carpets and tiny cramped rooms that looked more like prison cells than homes. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. Tucked neatly behind that horrifying brochure were 2 legal documents with bright yellow sticky notes attached to them. One was a drafted power of attorney form. The other was a quitclaim deed meant to transfer the entire legal ownership of my house. I stared at the bottom of the pages and saw the stamp of the preparer. It was Jamal. That was Chloe's slick, fast-talking brother, who somehow managed to get his real estate license a few years ago. I stood there holding the papers, feeling the heavy weight of their betrayal pressing down on my chest. They were trying to steal my home and lock me away. I left the boxes exactly as I found them and rushed straight into my bedroom, locking the heavy wooden door tightly behind me. My legs felt incredibly weak, but my mind was racing a mile a minute. I grabbed my tablet from the nightstand and immediately pulled up the security camera application. I had originally installed those discreet little cameras in the living room and kitchen just to keep an eye on the new cleaning service I hired last spring. Now they were my absolute only lifeline to the truth. I sat on the edge of my bed and began scrolling back through the saved video files from the past 3 weeks. I watched hours of Chloe just lounging around the house doing absolutely nothing, while my son was working himself to the bone out of state. But it was a specific recording from late last Friday night that made my breath completely catch in my throat. I tapped the screen and watched the kitchen video feed come to life. There was Chloe, sitting comfortably at my granite island with her brother Jamal. They were casually drinking my most expensive imported red wine right out of the bottle. I turned up the volume on the tablet and listened to their cruel, mocking laughter echoing through the small speaker. Jamal was leaning back in his chair, grinning wildly as he told Chloe that the fake legal paperwork was almost ready to file. Chloe took a long sip of my wine and laughed, saying the whole thing was almost too easy. She then laid out her entire master plan in crystal clear detail. She was going to keep planting small, subtle seeds of doubt in Marcus's head, telling him I was getting dangerously forgetful and showing severe signs of early onset dementia. The sixth scheme was specifically designed to break my poor son's heart, so he would panic and sign over his proxy, granting them total legal control over my medical care. Once they successfully forced me into that dreadful, cheap facility, Jamal was going to use his shady real estate connections to take out a massive home equity line of credit against my fully paid-off house. They were planning to maliciously drain every single dime of the financial equity I built over 40 grueling years just to fund Chloe's lavish lifestyle. Tears streamed hot and fast down my wrinkled cheeks as the awful video clip finally came to an end. The absolute darkest part of this entire nightmare was the sudden, terrifying realization that Marcus was completely in the dark. My sweet, hard-working boy had absolutely no idea he was sleeping next to a venomous snake every single night. I thought back to our recent evening phone conversations, and suddenly all the confusing pieces clicked into clear focus. I remembered Marcus asking me in a very gentle, worried voice if I was remembering to take my daily vitamins, or if I needed professional help keeping track of my daily schedule. Chloe had been systematically feeding him cruel daily lies about me forgetting simple things, or supposedly leaving the kitchen stove burning while he was away on his business trips. She was slowly poisoning his mind against his own mother, using my unconditional love for him as a weapon against us both. For a brief, agonizing moment, the sheer weight of that profound betrayal nearly crushed my spirit. I sat there on my bed, weeping for my son and the happy marriage I genuinely thought he had found. But then something deep and powerful inside my soul began to shift. The crushing sadness slowly burned away and left behind a white-hot, righteous indignation. I wiped the tears from my face and stood up straight. I survived 40 long years in the most stressful intensive care hospital ward imaginable. I faced death and despair every single day of my professional career, and I never once backed down from a fight. I absolutely refused to become a helpless, weak victim in my own peaceful sanctuary. Chloe thought she was dealing with a frail, easily confused old woman, but she had just awakened a fiercely protective mother who was ready for war. The hardest thing I have ever had to do in my entire life was walk out of my bedroom that evening and smile warmly at the exact woman who was actively trying to destroy me. I knew deep down that if I lost my temper and confronted Chloe right then and there, she would simply spin a massive web of lies and play the innocent victim for my son. I needed cold, hard, undeniable proof, and I needed to trap her permanently in her own deceitful game. So I made the conscious decision to put on the absolute performance of a lifetime. I became the exact, frail, forgetful old woman she desperately wanted me to be. When Marcus called later that night from his hotel room in Chicago, I made sure to sit right next to Chloe on the living room sofa. I kept my voice slightly shaky and intentionally asked him the same simple question about his flight schedule 3 different times during our conversation. I could actually see Chloe sitting there next to me, trying to hide a smug, wicked little smile behind her fancy teacup. It made my stomach turn, but I kept my poker face perfectly intact. Over the next few days, I sat back and watched her orchestrate her cruel little theater of gaslighting. I would leave my house keys right on the kitchen counter where they always belonged, and the moment I turned my back, Chloe would quietly slip them into her designer pocket. Then she would wait an hour and loudly ask me in a fake, concerned voice if I had misplaced them again. She did the exact same malicious thing with my Daily Mail, intentionally hiding my utility bills in the pantry, and then sighing heavily while telling Marcus on the phone that my cognitive decline was getting incredibly dangerous. I sat in my favorite armchair watching her weave this sick, false narrative, and silently took mental notes of every single vile trick she played, every time she hid an object, every time she gave me that fake, pitying look, and every time she lied to my own son. She was just hammering another heavy nail into her own miserable coffin. I did not say a single angry word to her. I just smiled, nodded my head, and let her firmly believe she was the smartest person in the entire room. Early Wednesday morning, while Chloe was out getting her expensive acrylic nails filled at the salon, I packed up my tablet and drove straight to the other side of town to see my sister-in-law, Letitia. Letitia had been a fiercely loyal corporate paralegal for 35 years, working for the toughest downtown law firms before she retired, and absolutely nobody on earth messed with her. When I sat at her heavy wooden kitchen table and played that horrible video footage of Chloe and Jamal plotting against me, Letitia did not shed a single tear. She just narrowed her sharp, dark eyes firmly and cracked her knuckles. She immediately took charge of the situation like the absolute relentless force of nature she has always been. First, we connected my tablet to her high-speed computer and downloaded every single second of that security camera footage to a secure, encrypted cloud drive. We made absolute sure that even if Chloe somehow found my hidden cameras and smashed them to pieces, the digital evidence was safely locked away forever. Next, we took the forged quitclaim deed and the fake power of attorney form straight to my personal estate lawyer in his upscale downtown office. We sat in his plush leather chairs while he carefully examined the documents Jamal had recklessly prepared. The lawyer looked up over his silver reading glasses and told us that what Jamal was doing was not just wildly unethical, but highly illegal on a federal level. Jamal had knowingly drafted fraudulent real estate transfer documents without my legal consent and was actively planning to execute a massive wire fraud scheme through a federally insured bank just to get that home equity line of credit. Letitia quickly pointed out that Jamal was committing multiple severe real estate licensing violations that would not just get him heavily fined, but could easily put him in a federal prison for a very long time. We sat in that quiet, air-conditioned office for hours and methodically built an ironclad legal case against them both. We were not just planning to simply stop Chloe from taking my beautiful home. We were making absolutely sure that she and her crooked brother would face the absolute maximum legal consequences for trying to prey on an innocent, hard-working, elderly woman. By Thursday afternoon, I was completely ready to spring the trap. I walked slowly into the bright kitchen where Chloe was busy browsing expensive online furniture stores on her sleek laptop. I poured myself a hot cup of tea, making absolutely sure my hands trembled just a little bit as I held the ceramic mug. I looked at her with a perfectly crafted expression of weary defeat and told her that I was feeling overwhelmingly tired and deeply confused lately. I let out a long, heavy sigh and confessed that I genuinely thought my mind was finally slipping away from me for good. I told her that managing this big, beautiful house was becoming far too much for my old brain to handle alone, and that I might need some serious legal help getting my financial affairs in order before things got progressively worse. The greedy, wicked spark that instantly lit up in Chloe's eyes was absolutely sickening to witness. She immediately slammed her laptop shut and rushed over to gently rub my shoulder, speaking in this disgustingly sweet, patronizing voice. She told me not to worry about a single thing and promised she would happily handle all the confusing legal paperwork for me just to make my life so much easier. She eagerly took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. Within an hour, she was pacing back and forth on the phone in the hallway, whispering frantically to her brother Jamal. She hastily arranged for a shady, off-the-books public notary, who was a close personal friend of Jamal, to come directly to the house on Friday afternoon to get all the fraudulent documents officially signed and stamped. Friday afternoon was absolutely perfect. It was the exact same day my son Marcus was scheduled to fly back home from his business trip in Chicago. As soon as Chloe confirmed the secret appointment time with her brother, I went straight into my bedroom and made a few very important phone calls of my own. I silently coordinated my own powerful ambush for that exact same afternoon time slot. Chloe honestly thought she was orchestrating the final masterstroke of her brilliant plan to steal my hard-earned wealth and throw me away into a cheap facility like garbage. She had absolutely no idea she was cheerfully setting up the stage for her own spectacular destruction. Friday afternoon arrived with a heavy, suffocating tension hanging thick in the air. I sat quietly at the head of my own mahogany dining table, wearing my absolute best Sunday dress. Chloe sat right next to me wearing a bright, triumphant smile that made my stomach completely churn. Her brother Jamal sat directly across from us, looking incredibly smug in a cheap grey suit. Next to him was a nervous-looking man holding a heavy black stamp, who Chloe briefly introduced as a very helpful state notary. Jamal confidently slid the thick stack of fraudulent documents across the polished wood right toward me. He tapped the signature line on the quitclaim deed and the fake power of attorney form. Chloe leaned in close and gently placed her cold hand over mine. She used that sickeningly sweet, patronizing tone she always used when she truly thought I was hopelessly confused. She softly told me that signing these papers was going to take all the heavy burdens off my tired old shoulders, so I could finally get the special rest I so desperately needed. She handed me a heavy gold pen and smiled like a predatory shark. I took the pen and held it perfectly still over the crisp, white paper. The room was absolutely silent. Jamal was practically salivating, just waiting for me to sign away my entire life. I slowly looked up from the fraudulent deed and locked my eyes directly onto Chloe. All of my fake confusion completely vanished in an instant. My voice was suddenly clear and cold as solid ice. I asked her very calmly if her new green velvet sectional came with a federal prison cell, because she was certainly going to need one. The triumphant smile instantly melted right off her face, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. Before either she or Jamal could even open their mouths to fully process what I had just said, the front doorbell rang loud and clear. Chloe stood up fast, clearly confused and angry because Marcus was not supposed to be home for another 3 hours. But it was not Marcus standing on my front porch. When the heavy wooden door swung wide open, it was my fiercely loyal sister-in-law, Letitia, standing there like an avenging angel. Right behind her was my high-powered estate lawyer, holding a thick leather briefcase, and flanking them on both sides were 2 very serious-looking uniformed local police officers. The trap had officially been sprung. Before the police officers even crossed the threshold of my dining room, another car slammed into my front driveway. The front door burst open again, and there stood my son, Marcus. He was completely out of breath and looking utterly confused. I had secretly contacted the airline on Thursday and paid out of my own pocket to alter his return flight, so he would walk through that door at the exact moment this nightmare unfolded. Marcus stared in complete shock at the police officers, and then at his pale, trembling wife. Chloe immediately burst into fake tears and tried to run to him, screaming that I had completely lost my mind and called the cops for absolutely no reason. But Marcus did not hug her. He looked right at me. I calmly picked up my tablet from the side table, turned the bright screen toward my son, and pressed play. His eyes widened in absolute horror as the crisp, clear audio filled the quiet room. He stood completely frozen as he watched the undeniable video footage of his own wife and her brother, casually drinking my wine, while laughing maliciously about throwing me into a miserable facility and stealing my money. The deep devastation on his handsome face nearly broke my motherly heart, but he desperately needed to see the ugly truth. Jamal started screaming wildly that the video meant absolutely nothing, and that the legal papers were just preliminary drafts. That was exactly when my lawyer stepped forward and confidently dropped a massive legal bomb right onto the dining room table. He looked directly at Jamal and informed him with a stern, terrifying calmness that my beautiful home had actually been legally placed into a strict, irrevocable living trust more than 5 years ago. I did not actually own the house anymore, because the trust did. My lawyer explained that legally speaking, absolutely neither I, nor Marcus, nor Chloe could ever sell leverage or borrow against this property, even if those fraudulent papers were signed in pure blood. It was completely untouchable. The twist was absolutely devastating to their greedy little master plan. My lawyer then turned to the police officers and calmly pointed out that by actively attempting to file that preliminary paperwork with a federally insured bank, Jamal had officially crossed the legal line from a simple civil dispute right into felony attempted wire fraud. Jamal went completely white as a ghost. The immediate fallout was the most intensely satisfying thing I have ever witnessed in my entire 68 years on this earth. The police officers did not hesitate for a single second. They firmly placed Jamal in heavy metal handcuffs right there in my dining room, reading him his rights as they marched him out the front door. We found out later that week that his real estate license was permanently and completely revoked. He is currently sitting in a county jail cell, awaiting a very serious federal fraud trial. My son Marcus was utterly broken by the profound depth of the betrayal, but he handled it like a true man. He did not yell or scream at Chloe. He simply walked right past her, crying form, went straight down the hallway and grabbed the exact same heavy-duty moving boxes she had maliciously bought to pack up my life. He systematically threw all of her expensive designer clothes, her lavish shoes, and her fancy handbags into those cheap cardboard boxes and dragged them right out onto the front lawn. He kicked her out on the absolute spot, refusing to hear a single word of her pathetic apologies. He filed for a ruthless divorce the very next week. Chloe was suddenly left completely homeless, entirely broke, and facing total legal ruin with absolutely nowhere left to turn. Her glamorous, luxury dream had crashed and burned overnight, leaving her with absolutely nothing but the terrible consequences of her own blinding greed. When the dust finally settled and the house was perfectly quiet again, I sat down in my favorite armchair with a hot cup of tea. I looked around my peaceful living room and took a deep, happy breath. My home was finally my safe sanctuary once again. Looking back on everything that happened, the biggest lesson I finally learned is that you must always take the proper legal steps to protect what you have built. Placing my home in that trust truly saved my life. You should never let anyone underestimate a strong mother's intuition, because when something feels deeply wrong in your gut, it usually is. I tried to give her the world, but she made the fatal error of confusing my quiet kindness for foolish weakness. Kindness is a beautiful gift, but it should absolutely never become an open door for someone to destroy you. Now, I want to ask all of you watching out there today, have you ever had a family member mistake your generosity for foolishness? Let me know your own experiences in the comments below, because I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story, please do not forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button so we can keep growing our beautiful community. Also, please tell me what city you are watching from and exactly how long you stayed for the story. Stay safe out there. Always trust your instincts and strongly protect what is rightfully yours.